So, hearing the difference, how do you hear the difference between those unprofessional and professional mixes? It's kind of like seeing the difference in a photograph. So, if we look at this photo right here, we can see that all the colors are present. There is some clarity there, but you can see it's kind of fuzzy, it's kind of blurry, but you really can see what's going on there. It's a rack and such. And it looks okay, you get the point. If we actually shrunk this down, it would look probably just fine as a little icon or such. But as soon as we add a more clear picture, we can see a big difference here. It all of a sudden makes that original picture look quite a bit worse and quite a bit unclear when we look at the clear version. And we can see there's lots of differences between the focus and the clarity and the color and such that really make this new picture really stand out. So clarity is a big deal in mixing. And a lot of times you think, well, it really doesn't sound that clear. And I used to think that same way, but it was because of what I was listening on. It was the speakers and the headphones that I was using and listening to stuff off the radio and such, that it really doesn't sound that clear. But then when you go later on and you listen to those same songs, high quality versions, through studio monitors, you realize that they are really clear. So some of the big things that you can tell when you're trying to define the difference between an unprofessional professional mix, other than the clarity, is the bass, the mixing levels of the bass. So bass is usually mixed too high in unprofessional mixes. And the problem is that people are mixing on speakers and headphones that really don't have that great of bass response. And so they kind of crank up the bass to make it sound better. And then when you get on a different system, you realize that the bass is just really too strong. The opposite happens also is when you have a really good system with a subwoofer and such, and your bass response is really good. You've turned it up and cranked it up, and it's totally awesome sounding. What happens is you compensate in your mixing and you turn the bass down in your mix, and then you take it somewhere else and the bass is weak. And so really figuring out where to balance that bass is really one of those professional tells. So if that bass is too loud or too soft, it really is a big jumping out thing that says this is not professional. Another big thing's timing. With professional mixes and such, all of the musicianship is really polished and the timing is excellent and spot on. And if the musicians don't nail the timing, the engineer is usually going in there and fixing it so that it is on. And a lot of times with unprofessional mixes, you're just, throwing this together as you're going. Maybe you're not that great on some instruments, but you're the only one to do it. And so the timing's off a little bit, and that's just a big tell to say, hey, this is not a professionally done project. Drums are a big one that's really difficult to figure out how to mix. And recording is just as difficult. But even with poorly recorded drums, there's some mixing tricks that you can do to make them sound better. And so if you learn how to get your drums at the good level, because a lot of times that's the problem, they're just not mixed hot enough in the mix and really don't have that right sound to them, then it's really going to sound unprofessional. The big thing is the snare drum. There's a certain sound to the snare drum that if you don't kind of nail that sound, then it just doesn't sound like you have accomplished that professional mixing level. And so the drums, that's one of those big ones that's a really big tell. And then there's reverb. Now reverb is one of those things there's two big problems. One is just having too much reverb, especially on vocals, and especially when it's your own vocal that you're trying to mix, because everybody hates listening to themselves, and so you add more reverb and now you sound better. In addition to that, you add more reverb and your pitch problems just kind of go away magically. And so if you hear a mix and there's just a lot of reverb on the voice and a lot of reverb on lots of things, it just all of a sudden sounds really unprofessional. The other thing that happens with reverb is there are some times when having a lot of reverb is fitting and good in the song, but in the professional world, they're using these really nice reverbs, and they can get away with adding a lot of reverb. If you're trying to do the same thing and you're using a really cheap, cheesy sounding reverb, it just becomes really obvious that this is a cheap reverb on this vocal that's just echoing like crazy. And so you really can't get away with it. So if there's a really cheap reverb on this vocal and it's just swimming in reverb, it's going to be a big tell that this is an unprofessional mix. So those are some of the ways to hear the difference between professional and unprofessional to help you in developing your professional ear.